So I guess where I'd like to begin is asking you, each of you, to talk a little bit about some of the most significant values, experiences that shape Indonesian culture. What makes Indonesia unique?
I will try to explain. Before about 20 years before Indonesia get independent, there are some youth nationalists that have a conference. They have every 2 years conference. So we know that Indonesia is the largest archipelago countries with consists of more than 500,000 islands with 400 different languages. So, but at that time, long time ago, those hero, we call them hero, they understand all of those differences. We have to be one, because we used to under colonial Dutch, and then they make a kind of like a youth pledge. We call it Sumpah Pemuda, which they agreed to have one homeland, motherland, one nation, which is Indonesia, and then one language, Indonesia. So that's the base of how so many differences in Indonesia become one, and it's diverse to be one.
As Mbak Dia mentioned, Indonesia is made up of over 7,500 islands. Out of that, about, I think, 6,000 are populated. So it's the world's largest archipelago. And it's made up of many different languages, many different ethnic groups, many different subcultures. Personally, for me, what amazes me most about Indonesia is the fact that you can keep all that together, and what Mbak Dia just mentioned is one of the things that binds that. It's very easy to have balkanization when you have so many different peoples. The other thing that really has helped the culture evolve is also, as mentioned by Mbak Dia, the fact that we were colonized by the Dutch. They were in Indonesia largely exploiting our resources for 350 years. That has shaped the psyche of the country, and it has affected Indonesia in many ways. Again, it's because of the fact that we have so many different subgroups. We were not always united. In fact, the reason we were colonized, the reason anybody has been able to have any influence in Indonesia was because in the past we were a lot of warring peoples. Nationalism, what was the other? Social justice, and satu lagi apa sih ya? Yes, democracy. And it's a democracy by consensus. So these are the guiding principles of Indonesia.
And one more, if you see that emblem, and that's kind of like, how is it? The banner. That's Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. It means that united in diversity. So actually, diversity has been there in Indonesia since a very long time ago. And if you go to Indonesia to visit one of the states, kind of like Washington and Oregon, you might see so different language. We not even understand to each other if you don't speak Indonesian language. So that's one state they speak so fast and loud. The other state they speak so slow and then quiet, something like that. So that's very unique from Indonesia. That's one of the unique things. A lot of unique things.
So in most countries, they have a traditional costume. If you go to Indonesia, we have many traditional costumes. Somebody from one part of Indonesia will have a traditional costume that's completely different. We'll have cuisines that are different. We'll have a language that are different. This is why Indonesia, in most Indonesians' point of view, is so unique. And Bhinneka Tunggal Ika is translated as unity in diversity, but literally it means many but one.
Okay. This next question, I really had Anita in mind because of your consulting with businesses, but either one of you but I'll start with Anita. I guess the question is, if you had the chance or asked to produce a guidebook for Americans doing business in Indonesia, what would be some of the top pieces of advice that you'd want to include in that guidebook?
This is actually advice that a lot of people in the business community are finding out is critical to success, not just at an individual level, but also as a company, as a corporation. The very first thing you want to be aware of is the fact that you need to be culturally competent, or at least culturally aware and culturally sensitive, because the cultures are so different from, say, somebody from the West. Even European and American cultures are different. But if you're coming from America, going to Indonesia, one of your biggest culture shocks would be the fact, for instance, that seemingly people have no concept of time. So my very first advice would be learn a little bit about the culture, and it's not just do's and don'ts. A lot of people think that once you have the do's and don'ts, you're ready. That's basically 101. You're just at the starting point. If you have the opportunity, learn the language. It's actually a very easy language to learn. Actually, a lot of business schools right now are trying to encourage their students to learn more about local cultures before they actually step onto, the ground. One of the things, there is a report, I'm sorry, but I can't remember who presented the report. One of the biggest challenges to in multinational corporations today is the fact that it is so difficult to manage people across borders and also to do business with people who are vastly different from you. Trying to think of what else I would say. Badia, would you like to add?
I don't have experience doing business by myself. So, but one thing that I would like to share, just for knowledge sharing, because of 350 years under colonialism, the old generation in Indonesia kind of like because that time is kind of like a slavery time, so they hesitate. Most of them hesitate to speak up. Okay, sorry. So most of them hesitate to speak up, and if kind of like this, although your boss told you to do this, and then that's correct, but you know the better way to do that, they will gonna say, yes sir, will do, just like that. So that, but now I'm very happy to see the young generation, they're now more speak up, more, have more confidence to say no, or I think this is better way, something like that. Before, no. That's kind of like a, yes sir, yes ma'am, just like that. So that's kind of sad, but very good improvement now. Yeah.
Indonesia gained its independence from the Netherlands 1947, I believe?
1945.
Okay,
yes.
So it's been 60 years, but that's still a strong characteristic of the culture, the deference?
When I was small, I still see that. Even when I was working in Indonesia, before Boeing hired me here, I still see that kind of like, yeah, still there. Yeah, but I know that now it's way different. Probably because of the technology, people, internet and so on and so forth. But we're glad that we see that now. It's a lot of improvement.
Even though independence was declared in 1945, we weren't really completely independent. We still had to fight for independence. The Dutch weren't completely gone yet. Yes, we had the Japanese in Indonesia, we had the British in Indonesia, so we basically had to fight for real independence for another, maybe at least 10 more years. And when the Japanese left, the British came in. They were the ones who accepted the surrender from from the Dutch. But with the British, the Dutch former colonialists were able to come back. And so they were trying to recolonize Indonesia for some time. And if you read about the history of Indonesia, there was still some very famous struggles, including Hari Pahlawan itu tahun berapa ya? 45 juga ya. So right. So in 1955 was when they had elections, and it was only a little bit after that that Indonesians really felt that they were truly independent.
So this characteristic of the cultural characteristic of being deferential, I'm not sure if that's a challenge or that's just something you have to be sensitive to. What are some of the other challenges when you think about the country of Indonesia that Indonesia faces, both internally or externally, that are the big ones that folks talk about? Some of the big challenges.
For right now, or okay, thank you. I saw from what I saw, because we always, me and my husband over there, we always read newspaper from Indonesia. We try to connect to television from Indonesia. So we try to get update every day about Indonesia. One thing that, for me, that really big challenge right now, I cannot say that Indonesian government is clean. It's corrupted almost everywhere. But if we saw that's a normal thing, because we just got from the era of Suharto, President Suharto, which 30 years as president, and everybody want to get a change. We want change. So then kind of like there is a revolution, another revolution in Indonesia. So since then, the corruption thing in every segment of the governmental, it's so big, so huge, so sad if you see that. Yeah. This is to be honest to you, but it's little by little work. We clean it up little by little. Difficult, struggling, but keep going, and then we saw the progress. So that's the most challenge that I can see from 5 to 10 years from now. That's from inside of the country. That's what, because Indonesia is young compared with America. Indonesia is just like a young teenager. Just 70, almost 70 years, but America more than 200 years, right? So kind of like emotional, something like that, yes, like teenager. So still working on it. That's what, for me, that's really challenge for us.
My answer is going to be more from a business perspective. There are actually quite a lot of challenges. Of course, a lot of opportunities as well. Among the biggest challenges, it's true, corruption. When Suharto, formerly General Suharto, rose to power, he and his family, they're very well known for amassing wealth. And it was during his time in power also that we have what's called KKN, really bloom in Indonesia. KKN, KKN stands for corruption, collusion, and nepotism. So people around him, close to him, associated with him, friends with him, became very wealthy. A lot of them are also military, members of the military. The military has played a very distinct and important role throughout the history of Indonesia. So Transparency International does a corruption perception index. I believe last year we ranked 114. A little bit better than before. A couple of years before that, it was 118. So we're not doing that well. The good news is we have an organization that is called KPK, which is the agency that tries to eliminate, I don't know if you can completely eliminate, but it tries to eliminate corruption. And if you ask any Indonesian or anybody doing business in Indonesia, they will tell you they have teeth. It's not just a name. They have arrested government officials. They have arrested military commanders. They don't really care who you are. So they're trying to do a good job. Another challenge is poverty. About 60 million out of Indonesia's population of 240 million, we're the world's fourth largest, most populous nation in the world. About 60 million are at the poverty level or below, and that presents a lot of challenges, as you might understand. Infrastructure is very poor. Our main airport in Jakarta, for instance, has been operating at way beyond capacity for about 8 years now. We don't have very good transportation, so much so that goods that have to travel outside of Jakarta, say they arrive at the main port in Jakarta, the prices can be very, very much higher. So it affects the cost of doing business. You have the roads that cannot keep up, you have ports that cannot keep up, you have airports that cannot keep up. The good news is our economy has been doing well. The bad news is it puts a lot of demand on the country's infrastructures. Floods. There's an index that measures the world's most flood-prone cities. Jakarta is up there along with Manila and Dhaka. So it's a big problem for companies. A lot of them have production facilities in Indonesia, and when you have big areas affected, then what happens is it affects your supply chain. I think that those are some of the main ones. And this year is election year. We're going to have legislative elections and we're going to have presidential elections. So generally, Indonesia has enjoyed political stability, but people are a little bit concerned about what's going to happen because the current president, who has had, I think, 3 terms in office, he cannot run again.
Okay, thank you. Both of you mentioned earlier the multiplicity of languages and religions in Indonesia. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the role of religion. One thing it's mentioned on, if you got one of the handouts as you came in the room, Indonesia has the largest Muslim population of any country in the world. Indonesia is, I think, the third largest democracy in the world, and 4th largest country in general in terms of population. But I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role that religion plays in Indonesian society.
So in Indonesia, yes, that we are the largest population for Muslim in the world, but Indonesia is not Muslim country. That's number one. Indonesia is not a Muslim country. Indonesia is Democratic Republic country. So in Indonesia, we accept all, not all, we accept differences, not only about the culture, but also about religion. So, for example, for the holiday for kids and for us employees, we celebrate not like particularly for kids in America during the summertime, no school, right? In Indonesia, no. We only our kid only get a break about 2 weeks, but we celebrate we off during the Christmas, and then Hindus New Year, and then Islamic New Year, and then Chinese New Year, and then also the kind of like we celebrate Idul Fitri, if you know about that, and Idul Adha, and all of the important day, the most important day for every religion that exists in Indonesia, because not every religion exists in Indonesia right now. All of the very important day that exists for the religion that exists in Indonesia, we accept it, and then we respect it, and it will be the off day for school and then for office. Yeah. So having saying that, in Indonesia, I think in every household, we practice religion, our own religion, Islam or Christian or Hindus or Buddhists or even China's. Maybe this is the first time probably you hear Konghucu. That's one of the religion from Chinese. Konghucu, probably the first time you heard that. So every household, they practice religion, and then that's the way they teach their kids. That's the best, the base how we teach our kid. Like my parents, hey honey, no, don't do that. That's not good. That's against our religion. Our religion never teach you to do that. Okay, something like that. So if you see in Indonesia, why all of Indonesian, this first time I met Sister Anita, I call her Sister Anita and she called me Sister Dia, because we both Muslim, and in Islam, as long as you are the same Muslim, no matter you come from whatever country, you are brother and sister. So that's one of the simple. Yeah, many things, but I cannot explain everything in the short time. Probably you can add.
I'm going to add a different angle. This is the historical perspective. We had Buddhist empires, we had Hindu empires, and we've also had Islam spread in Indonesia. The Portuguese came, the Dutch came, the British came. They all wanted the resources, and they all brought with them their religions. Islam was the first thing that really unified the country of Indonesia. By then, Islam had taken root. Even the British Empire in Southeast Asia, their base was in Malacca, in Malaysia, and that's because of trade, because it's, they have the Straits of Malacca right there. Malacca became Muslim. I can't remember in which century, but Malacca was Muslim. Sesudah itu yang Malacca. So anyway, we've mentioned a few times that the Dutch were in Indonesia for a long time. The very first pseudo-political party that was formed in Indonesia was called Syarikat Islam. I call it a pseudo-political party because what rallied people was the fact that they were against the Dutch colonialists, but it wasn't really, their agenda wasn't so much self-rule. The very first real political party was the party started by Sukarno, and that was Partai Nasional Indonesia. It's the Indonesian National Party, and again, Indonesia was a strong force. But when everybody really gathered at the end of the colonial era, it was Islam that rallied the people. Again, it was easy to do because most of the population is Muslim. I can't say that it was Islam that helped Indonesia become independent, because again, we are a multinational, multi-ethnic country. One of the major political parties at that time, which was a very tumultuous time in our history, was PKI, which was the Communist Party, actually.
Okay. Does the distinction between Sunni and Shiite mean anything in Indonesia? We hear about that all the time here. It's flooding the news whenever we talk about Islam in the Middle East region. Does it mean anything in Indonesia?
Everywhere in this world, there is a group that say no, a group that say yes, right? I agree with you, I don't agree with you, right? So Sunni and Shia in Islam, most of Muslim in Indonesia, we don't really care. You are Sunni or you are Shia. Yes, a little of community still think about that, but most of Muslim in Indonesia, we don't really care, because Islam is Islam. Islam is religion. So we believe in one God. We read the same holy book. And in the holy book, it's really clearly stated that if you are Islam, if you are a Muslim, so you are brother and sister. So in Indonesia, we don't really care about that. Most of us don't really care about Sunni or Shia.
Growing up, nobody mentioned to me that there were Sunnis and Shiites. I was just told that there were Muslims. So that's how little it mattered. So when I was first asked that question, I really didn't know what to say. There are some places in the world where obviously it makes a huge difference, but not in Indonesia. We do have the people who are on the fringe, but there's so few of them. By and large, Muslims throughout the world see themselves as one big brotherhood. That's why if, say, something happens to Muslims in one country, you'll see Muslims in completely other part of the world being very much affected by it. Having said that also, it's not just that the differences between Shiite and Sunni Islam don't matter. The differences generally between religions don't matter to most Indonesians. I have Indonesian friends who are Christians, who are like family to me. When they call me, they say, Assalamu alaikum, which is, our greeting, peace be upon you. Christmas, I'm with their family at home, opening presents, celebrating with them. And that's how it is in Indonesia as well. My grandmother was a very, very, very strict Muslim. And she was the principal at a school in Makassar, Ujung Pandang in Sulawesi. Okay, I have this pointer, I'm going to use it now, there you go. That's Sulawesi, looks like a dinosaur to me. She, with a very religious mother, was sent to school at a Catholic school. That's how little we care about these things. I celebrated Deepavali or Diwali with my Hindu friends. Chinese New Year, I know so much about Chinese culture, and then late in my life I discovered I'm about 2% Chinese anyway. But that's how religion is viewed in Indonesia. It's a guiding principle in our lives. It helps form our values and perceptions, but it's not contentious. If you travel to Jakarta, visit the biggest mosque in Southeast Asia is Istiqlal. It's beautiful. Not far from there is the biggest Catholic mosque. Very beautiful as well.
Yeah, probably I can add a little bit more. For example, if my husband and I, we really love to do traveling. We have been going from north to south, west to east, and in Indonesia. And if the time, because we as a Muslim, we have to pray 5 times a day, right? So when the praying time is coming, we can stop at whatever mosque that available there. We stop and then do the praying thing and then go. Nobody will gonna stop you. No, don't do that. This is not your mosque. No, nothing. So we don't really care about it, Sunni and Shia. Yeah, maybe for little community they think about it, but not for most of us.
I need to turn it over pretty quickly to you folks, but I want to add one last one. Before I do, I want to talk a little bit about Indonesia and other countries. And I guess I'll start with the U.S. And this is one of those big, broad questions, and I realize you can talk to a dozen people and get a dozen different answers, but I'm just talking to the two of you. So how do Indonesians feel about the United States, and do they feel that the U.S. has played a positive role in Indonesia's development, economic, political, whatever?
The first, Indonesia get our independence by ourselves. So not helped by any country, not helped by any organization. Our leaders at that time that bring our country be independent by ourselves. So having saying that, at the very first era of the first president, Indonesia didn't really get along with United States. Did not. Yes. And then the second era of the president, which is from, the first was Mr. Sukarno, and then the second Mr. Suharto. At the time, the political view changed. Indonesia became close with United States, but have a political issue with China because of the because of the I think China is, what is that? We democratic country, they are not. Communist, yeah, because of the communist thing. So, and then since then, I think Indonesia and USA has a very good, we have a very good relationship. One thing that I would like to share, this is the truth. When Mr. Obama be a president of America, most of Indonesian people, they're so proud, they're happy. Why? Because Mr. Obama used to live in Indonesia for 3 years. So they feel that, oh, kind of like a diaspora of Indonesia now being a president in the United States. So at the day when Mr. Obama, the day of the celebration, everybody there, almost everybody there also celebrated, so proudly. So yeah. So but if you want to know how big the influences from United States helping development in Indonesia, to be honest to you, I don't know. But what I know, Indonesia has the IGGI. IGGI is one of the organizations that help Indonesia in development. It's not only America, it's European and some other countries. So, but how many percentage, to be honest, I don't know.
I think you will get different answers from people from different generations. It depends on what they had to go through at, during a significant point in their lives. Post World War II, the US was not seen as a friend, as Mbak Dia mentioned, because they were providing financial aid to Netherlands to help them recover from, all the war efforts. At that time also, our first president, Sukarno, had a pretty aggressive foreign policy. He was obviously very anti-imperialist, and the US was behind the Dutch being able to recover. They also had bases in the Philippines, and so that was not a particularly good time for both countries. After that, when Suharto became president, Indonesia saw amazing economic growth. When Sukarno became president of Indonesia, it was a new country that was in absolute tatters after colonization, after war, after internal struggles for succession between, the different kingdoms. And so it wasn't a very easy time economically. When Suharto came into the presidency, he aggressively sought foreign investment, and America was obviously one of the sources where we got that. A lot of, I think the first companies were oil and gas companies that had already been in the country in a long time, but then he really opened the doors to foreign investment, and things improved. During the Cold War, what was happening in the US between America and the Soviet Union affected us too. Because if you look at, for instance, Senayan Stadium, that was funded with Soviet money. The reason it was such is because the Americans were starting to pull away from Indonesia. There's no way to make this story short. At the time, PKI, the Communist Party, was doing quite well. This was before communism was completely routed in Indonesia. And so there was some level of distrust. Yes, it was. The Cold War was what, 53 to 63, so around 1960. Personally, on a personal level, one of my uncles, who eventually today is one of the more prominent people in Indonesia, at the time he was in America on an exchange program, but he had to just cut his program short. He got sent back because relationships between America and Indonesia had thawed so much that it was just, terminated. Eventually, he got to come back, but it was because his host family, who later adopted him, grandfather was, I think, not mayor of Buffalo, New York, but something like that. He was in a position where his wife could cause enough trouble. She was writing to Congress, to the Senate, to everybody she could write to, and eventually he came back. But that's what I meant when I said it depends on who you talk to and what was happening between America and Indonesia during significant times in their life. Now it's very good. If you go to Indonesia, you hear American music, you see American culture everywhere. We even have rap, and that's not Indonesian.
How does, from your experience and your friend, how does Indonesia get along with its other countries in the neighborhood? And without naming them, the nearby countries, leaving out the U.S., but the nearby countries, how does Indonesia get along?
Indonesia, one of the founding members, together with other 4 countries, to create the organization called Asian Association of Southeast Asia Nations. So which the member right now become 10 countries. So it's really depend on at which side that we see. But if we get along, we do get along with everybody because we get along among ourselves, right? So and also Indonesia, because of the largest Muslim population in the world, we also get along with all of the Muslim country. Although we are not Muslim country, but we get along. We call it OKI in Indonesia, but I think in international acronym is CIO. I'm not or OCI. It's about the organization that all of the Islam community countries. So I think if you ask about get along or not, but we also have little friction with Malaysia about the patent thing. We have the same patent. Patents, yeah, sorry, my pronunciation. So we have the same food. Indonesian thought is Indonesian rendang. Rendang is the traditional food from Indonesia. But Malaysia also thought that, no, rendang is from Malaysia. So, but Malaysia moved more one step ahead of us. They patented that rendang thing. And Indonesia said, by the way, I think that's our food. So something like that. But it's that small thing. But sometimes it bothers people. Not between the government, but people feeling.
Probably not going to go to war with that. Might have a food fight, but you're not going to go to war.
No.
I don't know, Indonesians and food. That's a very good point. Indonesia was one of the founding members in 1967 of ASEAN. ASEAN now has 10 member states. What is most significant about ASEAN is that they are pressing for economic, among other things, economic integration by 2015. So you're going to see something very similar to what the Europeans have done with the European Union, except it's called the ASEAN Economic Community, AEC. So 2015.
Exactly, the Asian
Economic
Association
Community
of Southeast Asian Nations, I think?
Yeah, ASEAN, right.
Okay.
So one of their priorities is ASEAN Economic Community, and they just call it AEC, and the target for that is 2015, which means that come 2015, there will be no barriers to trade, for instance, whether it's tariff or non-tariff. That's a very big deal. Right now, of course, everybody competes for the same business. What they want to do is make sure that we are competing smartly and we're competing as a region. Yes, we do have our troubles. Badia mentioned Malaysia. I see it kind of like sibling rivalry, you know. A lot of us have a sister or brother we don't like very much. We love them, but we hate them. So we have that sort of relationship with some of our neighbors. Generally, one of the things that the organizers of ASEAN will proudly tell you is since the beginning of ASEAN, there has never been any war among any of the countries in that region, and they plan to keep it that way. Things do happen from time to time. For people in the aviation industry, the Singapore Air Show just happened about a week or two ago. It's one of the premier air shows in the world. Typically, Indonesia features very big. In fact, at the last one 2 years ago, I was there. We stole the headlines because of the big contract, $36 billion with Boeing. That broke commercial history, aviation history. But at this recent one, no Indonesian officials attended because two new, I don't know if they're new, but two Navy ships have been given names that offend the Singapore government. They are the names of two Marines who are heroes to Indonesians. The Singaporeans are unhappy because I think it was in 1965 when Sukarno had the aggressive foreign policy. Singapore was then part of the Federation of Malaya. And we weren't friends. Sukarno had sent those two Marines to bomb a particular building on the main street, Orchard Road, if you know Singapore. So just by virtue of that fact, you do have problems coming up every once in a while. But that is so few, so far between. Generally, there's harmony, there's peace, and there's a lot of cooperation, as you can see with ASEAN.
Before I open up the floor, do either one of you have anything to say about Indonesia's relationship with China?
Actually, my husband, my lovely husband, half of his blood is China. My mother-in-law is China. My mother-in-law is China. This is how diverse our family is. If we unite, in a big celebration like Idul Fitri after the Ramadan fasting, and we can see that all of the many family from my mom's side come by to my house, and they're not actually Muslim. Some of them are Christian or Konghucu that I told you, and then Buddhists, Hindus. But in our family, we don't have issue. But as the country, I think the political issue, the political view of Indonesia is free and active. Yes. We call it bebas dan aktif, so free and active. So I think what I saw right now is more open-minded, more think outside the box. That's what I saw from what I read in the newspaper. But I don't know whether we already get there as a friend or not. To be honest to you, I don't know. But
free and active?
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
That's our Indonesian political view.
Free and active. A view of what?
For the
relations with the neighbors, including China?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Not only for the China, but for everybody.
Anybody. Okay.
Any other country, yeah.
I'm not quite sure how to put it, so I'm just going to say it like it is. There was a time when relations with China were very bad with Indonesia. As I mentioned, the Communist Party was one of the main parties in Indonesia, of course, with a lot of backing from Russia and from China. In fact, I think outside of Russia and China, it was the third biggest communist party in the world. and a visit from the then Chinese premier, I believe 1960, was it 65, sparked, yeah, I can't remember, but it was 1965, sparked a very bloody part of our history. At that time, it was during the presidency of Sukarno. One of the ideologies that greatly influenced his thinking was actually socialism, and in terms of believing in social justice. And so we had very good relationships with China at the time, but the premier came and he said that Indonesia should have a fifth force in the armed forces instead of your army, just army, navy, air force, and right, can't remember the last one, it's not coming to me, but he said it should be just a armed people's force. Sukarno said, why not? A lot of people said no. And so that sparked a really ugly time in our history, and then after that, relationships went south. Fast forward to today. Today, China is one of our major trading partners. Whether China does well or not affects whether we do well or not. In fact, one of the reasons why our forecasts for GDP growth are shrinking is because China's economy is shrinking. So we do live in that interconnected world, and our leaders and our people recognize that.
Okay, thank you. That's great. I would like to open it up to your questions for long overdue, but we're going to do two things here. We've got, for those of you who want to ask, and Eloise is going to run around with the microphone. And if you prefer to just write your question down on the card, you can do that. And somebody will be running around and collecting those cards, and we will try to get all the questions answered. So.
When I compare your economic statistics to the United States, you seem to be doing a lot better. Your unemployment rate's about 2 percentage points lower than ours. Your poverty rate's about 2/3 of ours. Your growth rate is about 100% greater, 2 times greater than ours. If you look ahead 5 or 10 years and talking to your friends, what do you see? Do you see that you have a slowdown now, but do you see that picking up in the future, or you think it's going to continue to slow down?
Going to bring out my crystal ball. Yes, not just Indonesia, but most developing countries in that part of the world are doing very much better than America and Europe. These countries that used to be superpowers, that used to be economic superpowers, are now languishing. They are growing at 2%, maybe 3%, some 1%, some are not even growing, they're going the other way. But if you look at the numbers for developing countries, if you look at the numbers for Indonesia, we've been growing at about between 6 to 7%. So it's a huge difference. Looking forward 5 to 10 years, I really don't know about 10 years, but I'm going to try and say for 5 years, I think we will still be ahead because it's going to take a long time to recover. You've got structural problems that take a long time to fix. A country like Indonesia, though, what's amazing is we have corruption, we have poor infrastructure, we have blah, blah, blah. You can name all the challenges, but the economy is still going this way. That's because, you know, we have so many other factors going for us, and those factors are going to keep, you know, helping us going forward.
To be honest, about the economic things, Sister Anita would know way above me. But what I saw right now, because my parents-in-law, they are in a business, not big, but enough, but in a business side. And then I saw when my dad just came for vacation with us 3 months ago, and then I had a time to talk with my daddy, and then he said that yeah, it's growing, and then become better and better, and which this is from the closest family that I know. So I don't know my knowledge is not as large as Sister Anita about the economic, but from the closest family that I know, which my parents, and then he said it's become better and better. I really hope it's going better and better.
Thanks for coming. All Indonesians carry identification cards, and these identification cards, it has their religion on it. Why is that?
I don't know why, but yes, that's true. In our ID card license, we have we say in our ID card we have that religion. One connection that I can think of, in Islam, we only allowed to marry with Muslim people. So I don't know, is there any connection between that or not? I don't know, but yes, for some country, religion is none of my business. That's your own business, right? But in Indonesia, we have it in our ID card, but I don't know why we have it. Do you know why? Okay.
I did not grow up in Indonesia. I grew up in Singapore. And for a long time, I carried Singapore ID. I have Indonesian ID, I have American ID. In Singapore, they have information like religion as well. In that part of the world, one of the biggest culture shocks for me moving here was how to write a resume that worked, because it's very different from how it's done in Indonesia, for instance. When you submit your resume, you have to include a photograph. You have to tell them what your gender is. You have to tell them whether you're married or not. You have to tell your prospective employer what religion is. So I believe culturally, we just have different ideas about what's shareable and what's not. You know, we don't have we don't have to worry about being sued over that if you're a company. You know, you don't have non-discrimination laws the way they are practiced here. And generally, as a country, Indonesia is so non-PC. We have no hang-ups over things like race and religion. In fact, if you ask an Indonesian what they joke about each other's race. So that's my stab at why we have religion on there, because they do just think that it's okay to collect information about people at that granular a level. But, you know, Badia might have said something that's pretty significant too.
I have a follow-up on that. One more here. 95% of the Chinese are citizens of Indonesia. At the same time, the government has attempted to repress Chinese culture by banning Chinese language publications and schools. I know you've given a very nice picture of the society. Is this still going on today?
Yeah, I remember that when I was small, I grew up in Palembang, kind of like a small city like Seattle in here. At that time, because Palembang is kind of like a business city, we are more to the trading activities. So at the time, I think I heard many people speak in Chinese, but that's not allowed in a school. That's what I understand at that time, and also not allowed in the office area. I don't know now, because I have been living my country so many years, almost 10 years. But Chinese is different country. This is my own perspective. Chinese is different country, right? So Chinese language is not a part of Indonesian language. This is my own opinion. if we speak Javanese or one of that from Indonesia, from the Sumatra, we speak Malayu, we speak kind of like a Batak or whatever. In the office, you just fine. If you talk with your friend, hey, you come from Palembang? Yeah, I come from Palembang. Yeah. And then we so sudden speak our own hometown language. That's fine. But when we go out, we speak Indonesia. So I don't think that China language is banned, but it's not just Indonesian language. So you can speak Chinese, but not in a formal condition. That's my understanding, my own opinion.
I'm going to go back to my youth again. I grew up in Singapore, which is largely Chinese, so I had a lot of Chinese friends around me, and I didn't travel very much to Indonesia when I was growing up. When I made friends with Indonesians who were Chinese, I was very surprised to find out they were Chinese if you don't look overtly Chinese, because their names are not Chinese. So this is a question I've been asked many, many, many times in my life as an Indonesian. Today, I think a few months ago, I was in Singapore in a food court. I sat next to a Chinese family, and pretty soon they figured out I was Indonesian, and we had a conversation. And what was really lovely was the fact that they were so proud of the fact that they were Indonesian. They don't see themselves as Indonesian Chinese. They saw themselves as Indonesian. And so today the social integration and cohesion, I can say, is a very high level. It's very good. But I alluded to a particularly bloody and unhappy part of our history. That was where the antagonism against Chinese, all things Chinese, started, because communism, a lot of the support was from Soviet Union and from China, and we back then under Sukarno had a very good relationship with China. But when the Chinese premier had suggested that basically started civil war in Indonesia. The PKI in 1955, Sukarno, 55, 55, the first election. Because originally in 49, Sukarno wasn't elected. And then in 1955 was when they, went through this election process. Sukarno won, by far, but it became very clear that PKI had a lot of support. None of the political parties had more than, say, about a quarter of the population's vote, so they needed to form coalitions. But when Suharto came into power, he was obviously a nemesis of Sukarno. And he was not pro-communism. And when his rise to power was associated with the communists in Indonesia being routed, this is something, there are some words in every culture, in every country that are raw. In Indonesia, one of them is this, communism, Chinese. And so it was a time when pretty much communist sympathizers, Communist Party members, anything to do with that ideology was basically vanquished from Indonesia. And part of the effort to increase social cohesion between people was, I believe, to take away things that were overtly Chinese.
Sorry, I've got the mic. So I'm wearing my batik. I have a bit of experience traveling and working in Indonesia and with Indonesians. I love saya suka Indonesia, right? And cinta, saya cinta Indonesia. But so I hope my question is maybe less. Well, you're co-founder of the Indonesian Diaspora Foundation, and I've found, now that I'm interested in Indonesia, that I don't meet very many Indonesians in this area, And it seems like there's not a lot of Indonesians that come to United States or Washington compared with, the many other immigrants and foreign students and stuff. So I'm curious if you could tell us more about the Indonesian community that exists around the Seattle area and in America, and why does it seem like there's less Indonesians who come here to immigrate or study, work, etc.? How's that?
We just start our former ambassador, Mr. Dinopati Jalal, he initiated diaspora organizations with us because he saw that Indonesian people spread around the world, but we don't have one organization that will gonna unite us. So we are working on it. Yes, we do have a group of little community, but now we are trying to bring everybody together. You still exist with your community, but in one day or one particular condition, we are one, something like that. So that's why we create one organization, Indonesian Diaspora Network. Indonesian Diaspora Network is for the whole Indonesian diaspora around the world. And then we have Indonesian Diaspora United States. And then Mr. Ambassador asked me to create one organization, very young organization, still toddler. So Indonesian Diaspora Network Greater Seattle. So we are still working on it. We not even have our bylaw, still in concept, still draft. But we try to have a good organization to bring all of Indonesian together. So back to your question, why a very little population of Indonesian people that come to America? I think there's many reasons, many reasons. Most of people that coming to America, they are rich. Students. Most of Indonesian parents in Indonesia cannot afford to send their kids to study in here because the living cost so expensive, right? And then the economic there, yes, we are growing up, but probably this is the reality. The average income from United States, how much? 5,000 a month, 6,000? About that. In Indonesia, probably only $500. So they cannot afford to send it. Unless if the kids are from the rich family, or they're so brilliant and they get the scholarship. Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons. So many other reasons, but I saw that's the reason why probably, wow, Indonesian student, international student from Indonesia, very little compared with Korea, probably if we compare with China, but that's the situation that we have.
I gather you would like to get to know more Indonesians in the area. If you do, come say hello to us afterwards. The Indonesian Diaspora Network is for Indonesians living overseas and people who have history or have love for Indonesia. That would include you. We have community events throughout the year. Some of them are student events, some of them are organizational events, so we'd be happy to get you plugged in. Today, Larry was it Larry? Somebody was asking me why there are not more Indonesian restaurants. It was you, that's right. Somebody said, are there any Indonesian restaurants in Seattle? I said, not that I know of. There's Indo Cafe, and that's pretty much it. Well, pretty much Greater Seattle too. And so I've wondered about this myself, and my conclusion is the demographic of the Indonesians that come here, and also our socioeconomic condition in Indonesia. If you look at other, say, Asian ethnic groups that come here, a lot of them come en masse through mass migrations for either political asylum, you know, and when they come, they bring their families in hordes with them. So they form large communities. It's no problem finding, say, a Vietnamese restaurant, right? But not so for Indonesia. If you look at the profile of Indonesians here, a lot of them come here to work or to study. They might stay a little bit, but they all want to go home, and they don't bring their entire families here. There are some people who grow permanent roots, but they're not the majority. We haven't had a huge flight, you know, of Indonesians coming to America or anywhere else. A lot of the people who grow roots are people who actually marry Americans. That's probably the reason why. I hope I've answered your question.
Let me ask one question that I got here written down because it's a real nice follow-up to that. I'll be right back to you, Victor. The question was, it's at least it seemed that the majority of, well, as you pointed out, Indonesia is a Muslim country, but most of the students that come to study in the United States, that certainly is true here at this college, are Christians. And the question is, why? What are the reasons that there are not more Muslims from Indonesia coming to this study in the United States and at this fine institution in particular?
Very good question. That's the reality. Most of the students that come here, they are, hard to say, but a part of their parents, probably a part of them are Chinese. So which is in Indonesia, the business activities there, most of the biggest company or the strong businessmen in Indonesia are Chinese, yeah. Most of them Christian. Although part of my family, they're Chinese, but they're very strong Muslim, but Chinese, yeah. I already compare because my parents from Indonesian origin, really Indonesian people, and they go more to the government and then education, but not in the business, not strong in business. So in Indonesia, people who strong in business things, most of them are Chinese, and then most of the Chinese in Indonesia is not Muslim.
Yeah, I think Madia touched on a big part of it. The business class in Indonesia, a large part of it is Chinese. I reckon some of it has to do with that period of economic growth during about 30 years of Suharto's rule. A lot of his close business associates were Chinese, and so they did very well. But the other thing is, if you know anything about Chinese culture, they're very hardworking, entrepreneurial people. Anywhere they go, you'll find a Chinatown that's bustling. You'll find Chinese businesses. They thrive, and so they form a large part of the business class in Indonesia. A downside is when we had the Asian financial crisis, for instance, because of the huge disparity of wealth, they suffered the brunt of tensions and people's frustrations. But what is undeniable is the fact that they have, by and large, always done well, and so they are the ones who can afford to send. If you look at the exchange rate between Indonesian rupiah and American dollar, you get to have an understanding of just how expensive it is for the average Indonesian to send their kids overseas, even to some place nearby like Singapore. It is prohibitive.
Yeah, I'm wondering about when the Dutch came. Well, actually, I'm wondering about pre-Christian and pre-Islamic movement in the area there. Now, as you mentioned, there are many different peoples, many different languages spread out through the islands. But I was wondering if you know anything about again, pre-Christian and pre-Islamic culture, if you know anything about their creation stories, how the world was created, the way they believed that before Christianity and Islam came over there, you may or may not know that. If so, just a generic commonalities. So just basically.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't really know detail about that, but before a long time ago, hundreds years ago, basically there are two big kingdom in Indonesia, which Majapahit and Sriwijaya, the name of my university, proudly. So they both Hindus. So and then after that, the colonialism. This is what I understand. Christian come to Indonesia together with the colonialism come to Indonesia, and but we before that Islam came during the Mataram kingdom era. So and if you see in this map, thank you. So we have very strong Muslim along this Muslim population in here, but in this area, in Medan and then Sumatra Utara, some Muslim, some Catholic, Christian, and then in here Muslim, and then in here most Muslim, but in this area, Christian. Yeah, so in here Jakarta and at Java it's mixed, but more to this area, a little in the little bit east of the center Java, a lot of Christian over there. There's a Solo, it's called city named Solo. Most of the population in that are Christian. So basically it's just everywhere. We can see Christian in here, but Muslim in here, Christian in here, Muslim in here, Christian in here, most of here. We have very little community in this area that Muslim, but they get along. And then in here, most of here Muslim and then Christian. So yeah, I think that's the history that I understand. Christian came together with the colonialism.
So Badia is right. We were influenced by Hindu, Buddhist, and Muslim empires, and she's named some of the more prominent ones. Borobudur, for instance, which is in Jogja, it's a huge Buddhist temple complex, came from one of those times. Before that, Indonesians were animists. They worship forces of nature. They believe that things both animate and inanimate have soul and spirit. And that partly explains why, to this day, Indonesians are highly superstitious people. We still believe in souls and spirits for various reasons. And through our history, our leaders also have demonstrated, and our peoples have demonstrated, that while they have embraced religions like Christianity and Islam and Hinduism, very often it's a different brand from where it came from. Hinduism is largely practiced in Bali, for instance, but Bali Hinduism is very different from Hinduism in India, where it came from. Even Islam, you see things like Sunni Shiite differences don't mean anything to us. And same with Christianity. I traveled to a place called Tanah Toraja. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. This is Sulawesi. Half of me is from there. My family, my mom's family is from there. Somewhere around the middle southern area is where Tanah Toraja is. They are very famous for their funeral rites. A lot of them are Christians, some are Muslims, but when they die, Their funeral practices have nothing to do with Christianity. You know, they slaughter buffalo, for instance, to guide the departed person to their place in heaven. So it's syncretized version of the religion, and it's been completely assimilated with whatever existed before, and you have that brand of the different religions being practiced to this day. But I don't know about creation beliefs.
Excuse me, I would like to ask, what is the number one thing that you would say slows down Indonesian progress where they don't have to be interdependent with other countries? Interdependent with other countries? You say you survive off China, what they do. So what's one thing you think slows down the progress? And I have two questions. You say your ID cards say, have the religion on them and everybody gets along, but who really carries the burden of, the Indonesian struggle?
I'm sorry, you mean that the question is related to the the burden to Indonesian to
Wow, that is a really, really, really good question, because it touches at the very heart of problems that our government is trying to solve. They've got master plans for the economy, and another one is actually to eradicate poverty. So to answer your question, poverty is one of them, is one of the main ones. If you are a company trying to decide whether or not you want to set up shop in Indonesia versus other countries, that's one of the things you consider, because poverty affects education level. And one of the biggest problems trying to start a business there, if you are a big corporation, is the dearth of qualified applicants. It's still very hard for a lot of average Indonesians to get full education. One of the Indonesian organizations here in Seattle is called Cerdas, which means smart or bright. And what that organization does is basically find ways to help fund education for underprivileged children in Indonesia. When you have an education, it changes everything. So I think poverty and related to that education is one of the big struggles. And so if you are, we call it literally translated little people, if you're one of the little people, just like anywhere else in the world, largely third world countries, if you are at the bottom of the pile, you've got the deck stacked against you. It really is. I mean, there are all kinds of policies in place, things are happening, progress is taking place, but if you ask the average orang kecil, little person, he's going to tell you life is still pretty hard because it takes a while for programs to reach them.
I think I already mentioned before that the income, income per capita of Indonesian people is very low, so they cannot afford to say that. I think that's the biggest point. That's why so difficult for Indonesian parents to send their student, their kids to get education outside the country. And if you go to Jakarta, for example, you are gonna see that the gap between the rich people and the poor people, huge, very huge. And you can see it in many more cities. But we do see progress although the progress is not as what we expect. We expect, of course, everybody expect to get the progress as soon as possible, which is not easy for country like Indonesia. But it's still there. It's still there. I think that's the root cause of that issue.
We have time for one more question. You had your hand up for a while there, so.
I- Hi, I'm actually is not gonna have a question, but I just want to answer some like the question from you why Islamic is so strong in Indonesia, because really that transition, that's what the match with our culture, because we are really down from the Dutch people, and then that's Islamic coming, that's we are being strong with that, because our belief that match with them. And for the Chinese, between Chinese and Indonesia, I was in there 2004 until 2006. Really good connection, like Mbak Diah said, free and active till today is really active. That's why they can send the non-Muslim, mostly the Christian in here, and that it's because the Chinese, they work very well with Indonesia. 2004 and 2006, I was in there and being a homestay for many Indonesians. I did not see the Malay, the Indonesian face in there, the Indonesian, this Chinese business, it's world. That's why say ban about the Chinese magazine and in the public, but right now we are open. The magazine, the Chinese magazine, Chinese in the street also. And oh, that guy is already leaving. Why already left? Because we want to know its area. Why we have that? Because population, we cannot build in the and we cannot build in the Muslim. Just for the government now. Okay.
Well, one more. This is after the last question.
If I'm not mistaken, in class we talked about a big recession in Indonesia, and I want to know what the government did to get out of that recession, and I want to know what life was like for the common man in an already poor country during that recession. Thank you.
Yeah, in 1997 it was so bad, so sad, and riot is everywhere, and with the fire, with so many. Oh, that it was so sad, and many people killed, right? The reason because Indonesian people get tired with the government at that time. 30 years and more, the same president, never been in United States, right? So, and we got we got very down at that time because, for example, before that crisis, rupiah, our currency, to US dollar is only 2,300, and then during that crisis, it going to 16,000. So even reached 17,000. So can you imagine how suffer all of the businessmen at that time, including my husband? So at that time, we have to deal with something that 8 times more expensive than it used to before. So the crisis is so bad, and then but after about 7 years of that crisis, we see that our economic start to grow, slow but sure. And then now we used to loan money from some countries, but now our ambassador told us that now we clean from all of those loans. Yeah. So I think that's because we know what we want, and then we try to pursue to get it. Not easy, again, not easy, but step by step. You want to add something?
In 1997, the economy crashed in Indonesia along with other Asian economies, but Indonesia suffered the worst. The value of the currency plunged, banks shut down, businesses shut down. Generally, you know, when you have people of different religions, different races, they get along just fine if everything's going well. But when people are hungry, people get angry, then they start wanting to point fingers. So we started having a lot of strife as well among the races because of that. So it was very difficult for pretty much everybody in the country through those few years. That was also what sparked a student revolution, and Suharto was brought down. And we went through successive presidents pretty quickly in a short time before we settled on the current president. We call him affectionately SBY. And we eventually found our way through economic and political reform back to stability. But it was indeed a very difficult time, and it was a combination of change of government and change of governance that helped the country.
Well, we're way past it, overtime again. I hope you've all really enjoyed tonight's program. And please join me in giving a round of applause to Ms. Suleiman and Ms. Dharmawati.